Welcome to another Dragonlance Saga review episode. It is Misham Holmesworth the 13th. My name is Adam, and today I'm giving you my review of The Reign of Istar. This is Tales 2, Volume 1, or if you want to do like the new iteration of it, Tales Volume 4. In either case, it's an anthology of stories all about the reign of Istar, the era of Istar pre-Cataclysm, like right at the precipice of the Cataclysm. And it has authors such as Margaret, Weis, and Tracy Hickman, Michael Williams, and Richard Knaak, amongst others. Now, I would like to take a moment and thank the members of this channel and invite you to consider becoming a member by visiting the link in the description below. You can even pick up Dragonlance gaming materials using my affiliate links. And I also have to remind you that this is the 40th anniversary this year of Dragonlance as an IP, as an intellectual property. That's right. 40 years ago, with Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, Dragonlance was unleashed upon the world, as it were. And it started back in March, or actually I think it was in May, with Dragon Magazine and the short story, The Test of the Twins, by Margaret Weis. And then we got the module, and we got the novel, Dragons of Autumn Twilight, and the module was DL1, Dragons of Despair. And it just sort of spiraled from there throughout the year with a whole bunch of Dragonlance modules released, amid other things like the 1984 calendar and the 1985 calendar later in the year to prep for the new year, and all sorts of great stuff. So I decided to start a little project of collecting other people's thoughts and experiences and what they love about Dragonlance through the form of video, pictures, like artwork and stuff, or just written word. So far, I've gotten a lot of written word and not a lot of anything else. So I'm hoping that those of you watching this would want to contribute something. So you can go to the website, dlsaga.com/40th-anniversary, and learn how you can just email me stuff at info@dlsaga.com as well, and learn how you can contribute to this wonderful celebration of the 40th anniversary of Dragonlance. All right. Now, this review is just my perspective. If yours differs about any of the individual stories or the anthology as a whole, that's all right. I welcome different opinions here. No one shoots down anyone else's thoughts. We may not agree with them. You may not agree with mine, but that's okay because we all see and interpret Dragonlance slightly differently, and that's a good thing. That's a really good thing. So let's share our ideas. Let's share our thoughts about Dragonlance, especially when we do these reviews. And if you're joining live, you can share your thoughts through YouTube chat, in the live chat there. Or if you're watching this after the fact, go ahead and throw them up into YouTube comments. I always reply to every single comment, no matter what. There's some like ridiculous stuff that I get commented, and I reply to it all. So other people do too. It's not just me. Put your thoughts out there. All right, let's get into this. Now, because this is an anthology, I'm going to go story by story and just give you a brief synopsis and then riff on that story a little bit and then move on to the next one. Some of these stories are going to affect me a little bit more, and just in case, that's right, I'm a wuss puss, I have a tissue here just in case. That's right, some of these stories really actually affected me in ways that I was not anticipating. So let's get into it. All right, so the first story is called 6 Songs for the Temple of Istar by Michael Williams. This short poem was supposed to have been the only record of the great Silvanesti Bard Astralas, writing about visions of impending doom from Istar, but what it's really about is a bard being summoned by the Thon Thalas river on a ship which leads him to Istar and proposed a warning to Istar. It's a poem that uses style over substance, which arguably is what all poetry is, but it does not project any actual doom. It just promises a lesson to be learned. And so the setup of this poem, that's literally all I have to write about this because it's not a very long poem. The whole setup of this poem was that it would like prophesy the downfall of Istar. Well, the first 9/10 of the poem are all just talking about this bard sitting next to the river in Silvanesti, being called by it, and then the whole trip all the way up there. So talk about time wasted. And then you finally get to Istar, and it gives you these brief like one-liners about like events like nations affected or nations somehow having some sort of issue, but it doesn't really give any specifics because it's all abstract because it's a poem. And so you can't garner any actual information out of it. And then the last little stanzas are about Istar, and it really doesn't even do anything. It just says that they will learn a lesson, or Ansalon will learn a lesson. But do they? Do they really? I don't think so. All right, so it was not to my liking. You know, Michael Williams is sort of hit and miss for me. I really like him as an individual. I really like his poems when they're in the context of like the Chronicles and the Legends, and even the Dark Destinies. Not Dark Destinies, I'm sorry. The Destinies trilogy. I was mixing up Dark Disciples. But in this particular case, it didn't really land for me. And I even liked Galen Benighted. Didn't so much like... no, I liked... What was the first one? Weasel's Luck. I really liked Weasel's Luck. I didn't so much like Galen Benighted, which was the sequel to that. And The Oath of the Measure, for me, fell kind of flat. And so, again, hit and miss with that author, but I still sort of cherish him as Dragonlance alum. All right. Colors of Belief by Richard Knaak is the next one, and this was a great story. It starts with a knight of Solamnia visiting Istar for the first time and getting a first-hand dose of just how corrupt it has become. He meets an old bartender friend who leaves when he mentions Paladine. Then an inquisitor named Brother Gorim passive-aggressively mocks him and stages an intervention to arrest him. The knight came upon two men who ended up being guards beating a defenseless man. So the knight steps in and was arrested after defeating them, then immediately is sentenced into the arena. The knight refuses to fight, so the cleric, Gorim, had an innocent half-elf murdered, as every cleric of Paladine would do. Rather than let innocents die for him, he agreed to fight, and his opponent said that he would get him out of the arena as they were fighting the next day. The elf cut himself, then healed it, proving that he was in fact a cleric, and so the knight trusted him. They fought, and the knight was actually killed, then resurrected outside of Istar. The elf turned out to be an acolyte of Sargona's and was trying to maintain balance in Istar in his own way. What the story did was present a really great way of not just subverting expectations, but also showcasing how truly evil Istar had come at the end of its run. And this is something that I just desperately love, because this is the truth of Istar. You know, we saw it in Legends Trilogy. Istar was corrupt from the top to the bottom. There was no one there that was righteous, and yet, ironically, they all worshipped Paladine fervently. I mean, when you start to read these stories in this anthology, you understand why Paladine felt compelled to destroy this kingdom from the planet. I mean, it was just garbage. The whole place was full-on hot garbage. So I love that story. Great story. The next one was called Kender Stew by Nick O'Donohoe. I was not expecting, here we go. I was not expecting the story to destroy me emotionally, but it did in the best of ways. The story centers on a knight of Solamnia named Morgan. He's stationed in Zaxaroth, and he trains young boys who want to be squires and ultimately knights of Solamnia. While here, he met a kender named Lorraine, who was a sort of mortician. Morgan had no idea or refused to admit that she was in fact a kender, and they struck up a friendship and then a relationship. One day, she asked him to promise to train anyone who would want to be a knight, no matter who or what they looked like, and he swore to her his love that he would. She then, shortly later, left the city. Years went by, and a young man appeared named Tarley. He ended up being a half-kender, and Morgan trained him to be a knight squire like the other boys. He clearly shared the kender's traits that made it impossible to be anything but himself, and after the other boys finally accepted the oath in the measure, Tarley simply couldn't. Morgan knew that Tarley was his son, but he didn't know that Tarley knew, which he did. He promised his mother he would try to be a knight at her request. Then there's this moment that reminded me of my son, and even writing it when I wrote this brought me to tears. He had finished a middle school guitar performance at the school, for the school and the students' parents. And when we were leaving afterwards, he asked me if I was proud of him. This made me realize that I didn't tell him that I was, in fact, very proud of him, and that the fact that I hadn't told him meant that it didn't cross my mind, meaning that I didn't tell him enough how proud I was of things that he accomplished. I immediately responded, yes, absolutely, I was proud of him. He did a great job, and I swore to myself that I would never make him ask me what I thought again. When Morgan told Tarly that he could use his name and Tarly asked if he was proud of him, it all came flooding back, with tears nonstop. This was a beautiful story about a father getting to know his son, and they both know that they're on different paths. They may never see each other again, but they shared this training and the acceptance that life just happens to keep them apart. But even though they were dramatically different, they still loved each other. There was a B-plot about a cleric trying to steal the treasury that Tarly inadvertently made Morgan aware of, but that paled in comparison to the love that Morgan and Lorraine and then Tarly and Morgan shared. It was a beautiful story, and I'm not even kidding. I was like dying. Just everything that was happening that had existed in my life or up to that point was flooding back as I was reading this ridiculous story about a kender squire of all stupid things. But I'm telling you, man, it's the promise of really great storytelling and really great writing that even as a grown-up, I can read a children's book like every one of these Dragonlance novels are for young adult readers or younger. None of them are for adults. They still affect me in the same way as if they were written for me specifically. I don't know if that speaks to me being like, I don't know, a wuss puss, or if, just like totally emotionally broken, or if it is truly a credit to the authors and how the situations that they write about are so incredibly relatable and transferable to your own life. Anyway, I love that story desperately. All right, so the next one was called The Goblin's Wish by Roger E. Moore. This was such an interesting story that began with the best of intentions and ended with evil consuming itself. A kender was running from Istarian hunters who wanted his scalp. Yeah, the Kingpriest of Istar had a bounty for kender scalps. The Kingpriest, the guy who worships the god of good, Paladine. It just blows my mind that at no part in any of these decisions that slowly built over time that anyone was like, maybe the Kingpriest really doesn't worship Paladine. Maybe we shouldn't scalp other demi-humans that share this planet with us. It's the most insane thing I've ever... I just cannot grasp how you could put your mind in that place. And it's really only insane religious people that can do that. Because free-thinking, rational humans would never think that. Only people that are indoctrinated to believe something. It's crazy. So there's a bounty on them in Istar, and a goblin killed the human before it could fall into the kender's pit trap. The kender then invited the goblin to go join him for food, and they began to live in the forest together. Then a Minotaur slave was discovered near death, so they took care of it and brought it back to health. Finally, a white-robed Silvanesti elf was saved from the guards beating him to death. Yeah, all these different people were just brutalized by Istar. He began to trust this little motley crew and told them that there was a magical sword that was stolen from them, and that if they helped get it back, it could grant wishes and they could use it to overthrow the Kingpriest. The whole group wanted to go after the sword, and the elf believed that they all wanted to use it against Istar rather than for personal gain, but he was wrong. They finally attacked the Istarians, and they began attacking each other. The goblin wanted power, the Minotaur wanted power, and the elf was brutally murdered by the Minotaur. And I have to say, when I say brutally murdered, I mean brutally murdered. This elf was trying to stop the goblin, just verbally, from using the wishes in this sword that he crafted, and the goblin was ignoring him. The Minotaur came up behind him and just with chains crushed his skull and just kept crushing it over and over again. Woof. I mean, it was rough. So the goblin killed the Minotaur with the sword afterward, and the kender returned in time to see the goblin dying and wished with the sword that the goblin would go peacefully into the afterlife and wait for him there. The blade flashed and the story ended. It was a nice reminder that as much as Istar is obviously evil, so are the evil races, like Minotaurs and goblins. And it seems you can't always change your ways, as evil in Dragonlance will always turn on itself. Now, this idea is going to be challenged and wonderfully presented in another story here in just a minute, which I really appreciate, because on one hand, we're always showing how all evil races think alike. All minotaurs are alike. You know, Kaz is the one exception. All goblins are alike. All ogres are alike. But when you look at these creatures individually, you actually realize that no, they're not all alike. And Margaret, Weis, and Tracy Hickman did a wonderful job in their latest Destinies trilogy presenting this fact that all Daewar dwarves are not just evil because they're Daewar dwarves. Was it Daewar or Dagar? Dargar. I can't remember. Either case, I just like the idea that just because you are a member of a species, a collective group, does not mean you are a monolith, that group is a monolith. That you are, in fact, an individual with your individual motivations and thoughts. And sure, you're informed by the culture and the region that you're raised in, like in our own real life. But you still are an individual, and you have a choice whether to follow the herd, whatever that herd may be, or make your own path and be your own person. Anyway, stories like this make me think about stuff like that. So the next story, and I love that story. I think it was a great one. The next story is The 3 Lives of Horgan Oxthrall by Douglas Niles. And you know, if Douglas Niles is the author, it's going to be good. He wrote so much of Dragonlance modules, content throughout the ages. Like, he knows Dragonlance. All right. So this was also a great story. It's framed in letters from Forith Teal, a scribe of Astinus, to Astinus, about the lost histories of the Kalkist dwarves before the Cataclysm. It focuses on 3 tales, the first being verbal and the 2 latter from a rumored cave, not unlike the Dead Sea Scrolls in our histories. It speaks of a hero known as Horgan Oxthrall, and the verbal tale is how he turned oxes of Istar against the human leaders as they tried to invade the Kalkists at the behest of Istar and the Kingpriest. So the Kingpriest of Istar ordered his men to go up into the mountains and get rid of the dwarves. Because again, if you're not the version of good that the Kingpriest is, then you're evil. There's no black and white. There's no shades of gray. There's no other versions of good. It's my way or evil. And so the humans needed an ox because of their sturdiness and ability to carry large, heavy war machines and stuff up into the mountains to try to drive out the dwarves and stuff. It's sort of, the verbal tale is very much like that whole, what's that kid's like rhyme or something of, he like played a flute and like led rats away. He was like in Ireland or something. Anyway, it reminded me of that. Now I'm trying to... I usually mark my place, but I didn't this time. So he wanted to force the dwarves to worship the good gods and not reorcs. They failed, obviously, and Hogan was named a hero. The second tale is from the Scrolls of the Cave. Yes, the Pied Piper. Thank you. Private Uranus. That can be seen in a number of different ways. Great name. Hey, Larry, how you doing, man? So the second tale is from the Scrolls of the Cave, where it comes from Hogan himself. He was actually drunk before the battle, and when the oxen, who were also given liquor to ease their behavior for battle, smelled it on him, they chased him and ran out of fear. So the truth of the first story was that, no, he was just drunk and running away from oxen that wanted more liquor. Much less heroic of a retelling of the exact same story. Very funny. The next story is Hogan finding an ogre that humans... My writing of it, I usually read these and it makes sense, but this one did not. So Hogan finds an ogre that was basically being chased by humans that wanted to kill him from Istar, of course, into the mountains. And so it came up into the mountains to run away from the humans. Again, another bounty in Istar. This time, I think they wanted his head, not just the scalp. So the kender get off easy. You can live being scalped. It won't be nice, but you can do it. Not if you can't live without a head, though. That's a little thing everyone should know. Just, the more you know. All right, so Hogan refused the humans that insisted he turn over the ogre, and then he ended up fighting them off, and then he told the ogre to leave the mountains. And he didn't want the humans to win by having him kill the ogre as they wanted to kill the ogre. And this moment of grace or care was returned tenfold, for when the Kingpriest once again tried to subdue the dwarves, they were driven off by an army of ogres, led by the very ogre that Hogan saved. Hogan gave him the mountain in thanks. As the dwarves were leaving, the mysterious figure in the cave who saved these journals of Hogan ended up being the ogre himself. I loved this as it presents individuals over race. Not every ogre is the same, and not every dwarf is the same. Circumstances and morals determine the individual, and that is the strength of overcoming racism and bigotry in our own world, in addition to this fantasy one. Little seeds like that, while it's not presented in that sort of lesson way, are clearly lessons that we can take, into our own lives and apply, especially, these are meant for kids to read. And so it's very much like Brothers Grimm fairy tales, where they were meant to teach a lesson. They're gory and gross, and I love them, but it's like this, it's like an absurd little story that's meant to teach you a damn lesson. So figure it out, kids. So of course, how can you not love a Douglas Niles story? The next one is Filling the Empty Places by Nancy Varian Berberick. Now, this was a wonderful story about a bounty hunter named Hunter Dune who worked with a partner dwarf named Took. They would collect bounties for Istar, starting with bandits and such, and ending up with outlawed races and priests. Took abandoned the profession one day and left Dune, who later heard that he was killed in Zax-Saroth. Dune would pick up a minotaur and turn him in for the bounty. Then he's approached by a woman and a kender who offered him a job to get the infamous Kell. Now, this was a massive villainous figure in Istar that no one could catch. Dune agreed to go, but he had to break out the minotaur first, as the minotaur and the woman were friends. Reluctantly, he did so, and they all traveled to the desert and into the canyons. He grew to like Alice, the woman who offered the job, and they were beset by goblins in the canyon. Dune stayed with Alice and fought beside her as they were overrun by the goblins. And when he awoke, after being beaten down, he was being actively healed by strangers under his old bounty hunting partner, Took, who just arrived. Apparently, Kell, the person they were hunting, is Alice, the person that hired him to hunt Kell, and she created a refuge with her father in order to protect those that Istar deemed heretics. Took offered Dune as a captain to protect everyone, and he clearly proved himself as capable and willing by staying with Alice while the goblins overran them and fought, and he ended up accepting the job, and they lived happily. Not really ever after, because shortly after that, a rock fell on everyone. I really enjoyed this sort of a tale. First, I'm a sucker for romance. I love it. And second, it's an alternative to trying to bring down Istar. Simply, instead of trying to bring them down overtly, just avoiding their reach, staying clear of their maniacal claws, as it were. It's clear that Istar turned evil to everyone, which this anthology proves, but usually there is sorrow and loss involved in these tales. And this tale is all about hope and happiness. It's a nice juxtaposition. I really enjoyed this one. Hey, Solid Company, how you doing, man? All right, the next one is Off Day by Dan Parkinson, another really great author. This story is a really interesting one. Its focus is split on gully dwarves tapping into wine casks underneath the Temple of Istar and stealing random objects like cod pieces for use as stew bowls, and the clergy and guards responding to it. It prompts the clergy to want to open something called the Scroll of the Ancients, which would bring about the Edict of Thought Control, which is sort of the final nail in Istar's coffin, as it were. This is all under the direction of Fistandanelis, the Dark One, who is whispering into the Highbulb George III, whose clan is tapping the wine casks and stealing the objects. It's crazy that gully dwarves stealing random stuff prompts a resurgence of fear of evil, but that is the fanaticism and insanity of Istar in this age. It's a funny and entertaining read, and I really enjoy it. There's like one line where a guard is going to put his armor on because he has to go investigate the whole missing wine out of the cask issue. And he's like screams out of the next room, "Someone stole my codpiece! Doggone perverts!" I'm paraphrasing, but it was just so funny that a codpiece. And then all the dwarves went back up to get more so they could have more bowls. So if you don't know what a codpiece is, it's the metal piece that goes over your junk. Not the thing I would want to eat stew out of, but I assume they have some sort of like vestment or cloth between the metal armor and their fleshy skin. So it probably is not that gross. Still pretty gross. Anyway, great story. Anytime you get Agar dwarves in a story and it's not just about them being dumb, it's a win. Because Agar dwarves aren't just dumb. However, it does really a great job of setting up the high bulb George III. He was worried that other gully dwarves would try to usurp his role as a leader. And so because no gully dwarf can count over 2, he named himself the third. And that means that he is above every other gully dwarf. So no one could contest him because they couldn't even count to his name. It's absurd. It makes no logical sense. So don't try to get logic out of it. But it's hilarious. It's just stupid fun. All right. That's the penultimate story. The last story is one I've already reviewed on this channel before in a different anthology collection called The Silken Threads by Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman. And oh, buddy, did I forget how good this story was. I really did. Hey, Off the Grid, Grognard. How you doing, man? So The Silken Threads, this is the second reading of the short story, and I got to tell you, it's great. It's great. There's something comforting about Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman's writing. They created this whole timeline, and their stories are always revealing and insightful. This is no different. We're presented with twins running their family estate. Their parents died of illness. Their house priest of Mishakal, Michael, loves the sister Nicole, and the brother Nicholas, a new knight of Solamnia, is doing his best to keep the estate together. A revered son of Paladine from Istar is asking them to give their lands and castle over to the Kingpriest, which of course they're going to resent and refuse. He tells the brother Michael that he will send an inquisition to take care of them if they don't give it up, meaning that he will have them killed. A threat that has been metered out before. And he's supposed to be the good guy, the revered son of Paladine. Meanwhile, the wizard of black robes named Akar is met by the god Nuitari, who tells him of the coming night of doom, where the faithful clerics will be removed from Krynn by the gods of good. They will be taken to the flying citadel. If someone of goodness is murdered on the gate, there's like a little stair archway there. Well, you can actually see it in the picture there. Blah, blah, blah. Where'd it go? If someone's killed on the gate, then the gate to the abyss will open, where all of the evil clerics killed by the Kingpriest will then be able to leave the abyss and return to Krynn, leaving Takhisis with the only true clerics on Krynn. You know, the irony here is that she still ends up with the only true cleric on Krynn for quite a long time. Like, Verminard of Nidus was converted over by Takhisis as her first true cleric, and he was around for years before, the Innfellows came across him in Pax Tharkaz, or when he brought down the End of the Last Home in Solace. So she still got her win, just to be fair. Akar is promised more power than Fistendanelis if he commits the act, and so, of course, he agrees. He hires a goblin group to attack the knight's castle and bring him to the wizard. They do, in fact, attack as Mishakal is warning Michael, a plainsman from Abanasinia. That little line that Michael gives to Nicole, saying that he came from just north of Zaxaroth from a tribe of plainsmen, is really important later in this future stories that carry on the adventures of these two characters. For real reasons that I'm not going to say now, but when that story comes around, remember this. All right. About the coming night, he refuses to leave the twins and Nicole. The brother is taken, and the daughter goes after him. As they track the goblins that are forced to enter a magical darkness, they meet Raistlin in the guise of Fistendanelis, who needs the power promised to Akar, or at least needs Akar not to have that power, because he is in fact now Fistendanelis. He's traveled back in time to challenge the gods, but he has to find that doggone portal to the abyss. And if Akar becomes more powerful than him, he could stop him, and he doesn't want that. So he ends up guiding Michael and Nicole out of the darkness after she pleads with him about the love of her twin brother, something Raistlin understands intimately. They approached the citadel and saw Akar preparing Nicholas for the murder. Nicole tried to run to help, but hit a magical barrier. Raistlin instructs Michael to collect Akar's dagger when it fell, and hit Akar with a lightning bolt. Michael ran up, grabbed the dagger, and Mishakal appeared to him, telling him to wound Nicholas, who was near death. Michael couldn't bear the idea of breaking his vow to his goddess, but he knew that drawing any blood would break the curse, so he poked Nicholas with the dagger, drawing just a drop. Paladine collected the warrior's soul, and Nicholas was gone. Akar grabbed Michael from behind, telling Nicole that the cleric killed Nicholas and that she could have revenge by bringing him the dagger, so he could then complete the ritual with Michael. She approached him and ended up stabbing the dude in the hand, then cut him down with her sword. With Akar dead, the spell ended, the citadel disappeared with the dawn. Raistlin told Michael about the coming cataclysm in 13 days, and Mishakal appeared to Michael, offering to bring him into the citadel again. Again, he declined, choosing to stay with Nicole instead. This was an amazing story that I couldn't help but shed a few tears through the ending of it. It was written so beautifully with the comparison of Nicole and Nicholas, and even Michael, to Raistlin and Caraman, and the love and the connection between all of them was just emotionally overpowering, especially in these sort of heightened moments that were presented in the story. It was great. I really loved this story. So, all in all, there are a lot of wonderful and fun stories in this anthology that perfectly set the tone for evil that Istar and the Kingpriest were in the name of good, and why they needed balance. And for me, it framed wonderfully why the gods felt that they had to stop this kingdom. I would highly recommend this anthology to anyone who enjoys Dragonlance and its history, and even Raistlin, because he makes an appearance, and that's always great. All right, so you get warm vibes from their writing? Yeah, me too, man. Especially when it's like these sort of one-off stories, because they don't have these sort of, well, in this particular case, it is kind of an earth-shattering moment, challenging the gods. But it's always, instead of being like the heroes of the lance in every single story, they tell these sort of side stories that sort of tangentially connect with the greater thematic narrative, but you get to know these sort of ancillary characters that you wouldn't ever meet otherwise, and their motivations and their loves and their worries, and they're fully fledged humans, the way they write them. And I can completely believe them as fully fledged humans. The only one that was a little off was a dude named Michael coming from Plainsman. Now, I will say that maybe that wasn't his Christian name, because what people would normally do is when they get baptized, they would be given a name, or they would adopt a name that would be their Christian name. In some cases, this is their last name, and in sort of indigenous people's case, it would be brand new names, because you couldn't have your indigenous names if you're going to be a Christian. This is one of the downsides to Christianity, one of the many downsides to Christianity that just drive me insane. Look up anything that Christians ever did to any indigenous peoples ever, full stop, and I wonder why anyone could ever appreciate any Islamic Judeo-Christian religions. It's insane, the brutal, ridiculous monstrosities that they have committed, and the horrid sexual assaults and rapes that they currently commit to children all around the world. And instead of prosecuting these disgusting rapist priests and pedophiles, they just shift them around to different dioceses. Hey, great, yeah, let's worship that religion. Ugh. And Native Americans, man, they got the brunt end of it. You just look under anything that doggone Christians did to them. They forced sterilized women. They brutally beat and murdered children in their schools and orphanages. They refused to allow them to speak their native tongue. They forced them to cut their hair so that they didn't look native. I mean, they were just brutal monsters. I mean, if you want to make a comparison of any religion to Istar and the Kingpriest, well, we just did. All right. That is it for my review on that high note of The Reign of Istar by Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman, including people like Michael Williams, Richard A. Knaak, etc. What do you guys think of the collected stories? Did you have a favorite one or a favorite author? And finally, would you ever play a game set in the few final weeks of Istar? Feel free to email me at info@deals. What is my email? info@dlsaga.com, or leave a comment below. I would like to take a moment and remind you to subscribe to the YouTube channel, ring the bell to get notified about upcoming videos, and click the like button. All that goes to help other Dragonlance fans learn about this channel and its content. This channel is all about celebrating the wonderful world of Dragonlance Saga in this here 40th year. And I hope that you'll join in that celebration. Thank you for watching. This has been me, Adam, for Dragonlance Saga. Until next time, Slán Java.